Okay, so my research looked into sensory priming, and pretty much so far this semester we've looked into cognitive priming, which, just to refresh you, is the ability of previous information to impact your answer on a test later. So, but mine is specifically sensory priming, which pretty much the difference is that instead of being primed with words previously, you're primed with music or on one of your other senses. But I specifically looked into music. So some previous research done on the topic included this study done by Tillman et al. And they looked into patient IR who suffered from amusia. And what amusia is the inability to recognize musical tones or to recreate them later. So they played her a lot of different music, and then later they did a forced recognition test and asked her to identify which music had been played previously. And what they found is that she was able to identify the music that had been played, which helps to show that she had been implicitly primed, which shows that musical priming is a viable option for priming people. In another study done by Tay and Ing, they looked into different ways to categorize the music that we use for these experiments. So they did, they categorized the music as either positive or negative, and they looked into how key and speed can change this. And so what they did is they played different songs for participants that varied in these categories, and they asked them to pick a word from a word box they were provided on how they would describe the music that they listened to. And what they found was that the songs that were in major key and that were faster were seen as more positive, whereas the ones that were in minor key and slower were found more negative. So this is really good because it provides us with a way to categorize the music in sensory priming. And it also goes to show that you can prime people with emotional words. So it does show again that you can prime music. So my experiment looked into if you can prime people with music and have it impact their perception of subsequent information. So I kind of shifted it a little bit to if it can change their opinions on things that they hear later. So what I did was I gave participants either negative or positive music, and I used the techniques talked about on the last slide. So they were either provided with negative music, which was in a minor key and slower, or positive music, which was in the major key and faster. Or if you were in the control, you didn't get any music. So I had them listen to 4 minutes of music, and then they listened to, or after they listened to it, they were asked to read an article, and the article was on COVID-19 and how an expert was implying that the economic impacts won't be as bad as we previously thought. So after they read the article, they were asked to rate how believable they found the claims in the article. And this is something that hasn't really been looked into before, because it hasn't been looked into how it can, how priming can impact your ability to understand or to accept later information, which is important to know because people listen to music all the time, and it's important to know how that impacts the information you hear later. So my independent variable was the music that they listened to, and the dependent variable was how believable they found the claim in the COVID piece. It was between subjects design, and 12 people took part in it. So overall, my results showed that it was not statistically significant. As you can see, pretty much everything was the same. The p-value was 0.91, so quite the opposite of statistically significant. It shows that they were all pretty much the same. But getting into what I think that this means, I think that sensory priming is still, obviously sensory priming still exists. I think that my experiment went about it in the wrong way to test this specific impact of it. And I think that I could have designed it a little bit better so that it came across a little bit more. One way is maybe they didn't listen to the music for long enough. So they listened to it for 4 minutes, but maybe you have to listen to music longer to be primed with the music. Another option is, in all of my research on the topic, it was interesting in that they primed them with the music, but then they were also tested with music, whereas mine was primed with music and tested with reading something and answering a question on it. So I think that if I found a way to test this with music instead, it might show a different result also. Another thing that I thought was pretty interesting was that the negative bar was, they rated the piece a little bit more believable than all the other ones. Not enough to say that it's anything important, but if this was based off of the type of music that they listened to, it would be interesting to look into this more. So I think one possible explanation for this could have been that the article itself was negative. It was talking about the economic downfall pretty much after COVID-19. So maybe if you're negatively primed, you go into this being more negative, so you believe the negative claim it's making. So that's kind of how I thought of that. Maybe if that was caused at all by the type of music they listened to. I still think that this is important to look into though, because I mean, especially as a college student, you walk around campus and everyone has their headphones in, like listening to music. And music is just such a central theme in most people's lives that I think it's important to recognize the impacts that it might have on our decision making or our ability to understand or accept new information. So say you're listening to a lot of negative music and then you walk into your psychology class, and because you were listening to negative music, you don't accept the claims that were made in class. You don't find it as believable, so you don't really pay attention to it. So it'd be interesting to see how it can impact things later on in the day after you've listened to these negative music. So overall, I think it should still be looked into. I think it should be looked into using different methods so it can hopefully get statistical significance later down the line. So thank you.